Hey friends, it's just the gems. I'm Brandon. What on earth? No, let me start over. Hey friends, it's just the gems. I'm Brandon. I recently put out a video about anxiety and finding games to help deal with it. And there were a handful of people that were shocked and even offended that I might express empathy and kindness for people that they disagreed with or thought were below them in some way. I know I shouldn't be surprised that those sorts of people exist. I mean, the internet is the great equalizer. It brings out all sorts of people and gives them the anonymity they need in order to be their true, authentic selves. But still, in my own life, I'm surrounded by people who all show a great deal of empathy and kindness, and it's jarring to see that not everyone acts the same way. Empathy, at its core, is about understanding how other people are feeling. But beyond simply understanding someone's feelings, I see the action you take because of that knowledge to be the determining factor of whether or not you're truly an empathetic person. And that's where kindness comes in and acts as a vital partner to empathy. And since this is a channel that talks about video games, I got curious if there were any JRPGs that might have some good examples of this in them. Turns out, there are. So I'm going to talk about them. Now, this should go without saying, but I feel like I should say it anyway. I'm not the expert on empathy. I'm thinking about this stuff for my own benefit as much as for yours. So please don't think I'm looking down from atop Mount Brandon and judging all of you unempathetic people below. I suck sometimes, I really do. But I want to be better. Okay. Now, before we dive in, would you consider subscribing if you aren't already? I just recently hit the 10,000 subscriber mark, which is great because a priest told me that if I ever got to 10,000 subscribers, he would entreat God for the absolution of my sins. At least I think he was a priest. He was wearing a black shirt and day drinking in a parked van outside of a church. Or was it a 7-Eleven? Doesn't matter. Oh, and if you like the video, would you mind clicking like? And if you have any examples of games that might help teach empathy that I don't mention, would you leave them in the comments below? I'm always interested in expanding my repertoire of games to gush about. Okay, on with the video. Let's kick it off with a bang, why don't we? Chrono Trigger is a classic. Not many people would debate that. It's a simple story at heart. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl in time portal, boy and girl and frog and cave woman have to save world from giant spiky parasite. Tale as old as time, really. But what carries the story, what makes it such an unforgettable adventure, is its characters. Even setting aside the silent protagonist that doesn't do much except fist pump, you've got the princess that's tired of the shackles of royal obligation, the knight turned frog who was willing to give up so much for his kingdom, the wizard boy who just wants to be reunited with his long-lost sister. The way their stories play out and the way they interact with each other is frequently moving and always entertaining. I could probably make a strong empathy argument out of most of them, but I want to focus on two characters, Luca and Robo. Chrono, Marl, and Luca find Robo abandoned in an old dome far in the future. Luca is excited right away and thinks she can fix him up, get him working again. Marl is hesitant because she says, what if it decides to attack them? Luca's response is really key to her character. She says, a robot like this won't inherently decide to attack a human. It's other humans who make them that way. From the beginning, before she's even really been introduced to Robo properly, she already sees him as someone worth defending. She can imagine being in his shoes, being unfairly judged by someone she doesn't know. She sees an unfair characterization of this creature, even one coming from a friend, and she's willing to stand up for him. Needless to say, the friendship that's forged between Luca and Robo is one of the key relationships in the game. Her ability to empathize with someone who's different from her, someone who is honestly different from everyone she knows, seems to suggest Luca has a much higher than average level of emotional intelligence. And her empathy allows the rest of the party to begin to empathize with Robo too, to the point where when the truth about Robo's origins gets revealed, the rest of the team is fully there to support him. So, kindness that you show to someone can even extend beyond yourself and that other person. The people around you in your life see the way you empathize with that person, and it affects them. It helps them grow too. It's a chain reaction, and it can start with just simply showing kindness to someone who's different than you. Final Fantasy XVI takes place in an exceedingly dark world. It's got that sort of Game of Thrones feel, that super grim high fantasy setting where everything seems to just be extremely awful. As far as the people go, there's the super powerful, there's the peasants, and then there's an entire class of people that are held down by everyone, peasants included. That latter group are the bearers, and they're people that are born with the ability to use magic on their own without having to resort to using crystals like everyone else. Now, you might think, why or even how would a group of people that are born with significant powers even be able to be subjugated by anyone? Well, it turns out just having powers doesn't mean all that much when the entirety of society is against you. It's a topic that was also recently explored in Renatus, a game I covered on this channel. But anyway, the world's in a bad place, and there are people that are treated especially bad even within this already bad world. If that's all there was to it, I think it would have been pretty depressing for me to play through. Fortunately, though, we have Clive. See, Clive is the main character, he's a rightful prince, and his whole life he's been supportive of bearers. He wouldn't have to be. There's nothing in particular about his upbringing that would suggest he should show them any favor at all. But he's not a stranger to being mistreated. Even before the events of the game, his mother seems to despise him, simply because he wasn't born with the ability to summon Phoenix, unlike his younger brother. Maybe this was what he needed to be able to see bearers as human beings no different from him. Early on, we see instances of him showing kindness to bearers, maybe because he knows what it's like to be mistreated for no real reason. As the game progresses, of course, he gets an even more up-close and personal look at the life of a bearer, and pretty soon one of his main goals is to make life better for them. Having walked a mile or 10 in their shoes really shows him how bad it is for them, and his previous simple kindness grows into a much deeper purpose for him. Kindness for those who might not be as fortunate as you are in this moment is important, but even better is really seeing someone's plight through their eyes. Not that you should wish ill on yourself just for the ability to be able to better empathize, but it's important to use those opportunities where you're struggling to actually learn and grow so that when your fortunes shift, you're still able to find that empathy within yourself for those that are struggling. It's not easy, but it seems super important. The world of Visions of Mana is bright and colorful and seemingly just an all-around cheerful place. But hiding just out of sight is the sad fact that in order to maintain that bright and colorful world, people have to die. It's a dark premise, and it's not one that's entirely unique to Mana either, but the attitude taken by the characters feels a bit different than other stories. The sacrificial characters in Visions of Mana are happy to die. Like, that's not to say that some of them don't have things they wish they'd done or regrets, but to them, giving themselves up for the people in their communities is the greatest gift. Now, we're fortunate that we live in a world where that sort of self-sacrifice isn't necessary. In fact, I'd say that kind of self-sacrifice is straight up bad. And the storyline of Visions of Mana, of course, goes on to make that clear. The world is better with you in it, period. But the fundamental attitude behind the characters in Visions of Mana still contains a lesson I think we can learn from. It's this idea that we all exist as part of a community. Even those of us who feel like loners, who keep to ourselves most of the time, who find it to be a huge struggle to get out of the house and see friends in person, none of us exist outside the context of community. Because of that, the things we choose to do have an impact on those around us. The characters in Visions of Mana care about their communities so powerfully that there's literally nothing they wouldn't give up for them. The thing about living in a community is it does require a bit of give and take. Caring about someone else, whether that's someone you know in person or just someone you encounter anonymously online, means being willing to extend a helping hand, even if it sometimes costs you something. I don't mean that you shouldn't be discerning and just help anyone who asks without question. Only that if we don't lift each other up, we all fall down. If everyone can be a bit more gracious and giving, that lessens the burden on everyone. Community is a team effort, and teamwork makes the dream work. Sorry, I'll delete my account. The Trails series as a whole is actually a great one for teaching empathy because, by and large, the main cast tend to be pretty wholesome people who are looking out for others. But I want to focus on Trails through Daybreak because it introduces us to Van Arkwright, and his way of showing empathy is pretty unique, at least in the video game arena. Van runs Arkwright Solutions, which is a sort of fixer-type place where he takes on any job from anyone, so long as they can pay. This means he'll be doing jobs for the Bracers, aka the all-around good guys of the Trails universe, and he'll be doing jobs for Ouroboros, the mustache-twirling villains behind the scenes. Maybe this strikes you as odd, and I think it's supposed to. See, Van refuses to see the world in terms of black and white, good and evil. He understands there are layers and layers of complexity behind every single person, and you can't boil them down to a couple of hyperbolic adjectives. So long as a person's request doesn't violate Van's personal guidelines of what constitutes right and wrong, he'll provide his services. But along the way, toward the goal of earning those fat stacks of cash, Van frequently finds himself forced to choose between the easy and often more lucrative path, and the path that means he ends up losing out, but takes care of someone else. And you know what? He pretty much always puts the needs of others over his own. Now, he complains about it, significantly. At the end of the day, though, does it really matter that he doesn't always seem to have the best attitude about it? Actions speak louder than words. What I take from this is that even if it's hard for me to always do the right thing cheerfully, so long as I'm doing it, so long as I'm caring for the people around me, that's by far the most important thing. The attitude adjustment, I can work on in my own time. When a friend is struggling with something, it can be super difficult to know exactly how to talk to them, how to treat them. For the characters in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you can see this a lot in how they interact with Cloud. It's clear from the get-go that Cloud is suffering with something, though even he isn't sure what it is. His strange visions, times when his body seems to move without his input, it's concerning, to say the least. I think his friends do an admirable job of attempting to be patient and understanding with him, to a point. But the lesson they teach us is, in my mind, actually the opposite of what they do. They see their friend suffering and they feel deeply for him, but they're not sure what to do, so they do nothing. Their hesitancy to confront Cloud about his situation leads them all down a pretty dark path, and it's a pit that's all too easy to fall into. Caring deeply about someone, even putting yourself into their shoes, can make it seem like it should suffice to just be there for them, to support them. But sometimes they need more help than you can give, and turning a blind eye to the signs isn't doing them any favors. Now, obviously, there aren't a ton of reputable mental health professionals just hanging around in the world of Final Fantasy VII, like they couldn't just ZocDoc somebody, so I don't know what the party should have done differently. But I think the lesson to take away from their story is not to wait until it's too late, but seek support for someone struggling as soon as it's clearly necessary. There's a lightness in Omori that I really relate to. Not just in the dream world where Sunny spends his time imagining adventures with his friends. In the real world, where Sunny's a shut-in who's cut himself off from his friends for years. Now, don't get me wrong, Omori is a very dark game. I think I referred to it as trigger warning the game in my review, possibly. If I didn't, that's a pretty good line. I should have. But ultimately, there's an optimism in the real-world segments that's hard to see at first, but that makes itself clear as the story progresses. That light and optimism comes from Kel, Sunny's friend, and the first person to really reach out to him. See, and without spoiling the story, Sunny has been holed up in his house for years, due to something unfortunate that happened, which led to the estrangement of his entire friend group. One day, Sunny's old friend Kel sees a for sale sign in front of Sunny's house, and he musters up the courage to check in on him. This leads to Sunny gradually beginning to emerge from his self-imposed exile and finally begin to reconnect with the people who meant so much to him. Again, without spoiling the story, and also assuming you play the game toward the best ending, this leads to a much better conclusion than the path Sunny had been on all that time. And it's all because his old friend reached out. When someone you care about is dealing with some tragic loss, it can be really hard to know what to do or say. It's easier and it feels safer even to just leave them be, to think, oh, they'll reach out to me if they need something. But it can help to think about times you've experienced loss and consider what would have helped you during those times. Sure, sometimes you might want to be alone, but would you have held it against anyone if they offered you their time even if you didn't want it? Of course not. If anything, you'd be appreciative. So try not to get too much in your own head and reach out to a friend if they're struggling with something like that. You might really be able to help, and if not, then at least they'll know you're there for them if they ever do need you. Alright, saving the best example for last, because Undertale is the only game on the list where the gameplay itself is all about empathy. At least on the pacifist route. If you're doing a genocide run, this might not apply. Anyway, Undertale is unique in that it gives you the option of avoiding fights completely. And I don't just mean running away. I mean that you can essentially convince your enemies to leave you alone by engaging with them during battles. The process for talking each enemy out of fighting is different for all of them. It requires you to take a moment and think about what they might want, to experiment a little and see what sort of reaction you get. You can observe the enemy for clues, like the monstrosity that found itself decorated for the holidays against its wishes by some local teenagers. Once you know it's not wearing all that tinsel for fun, you get the sense that maybe by cleaning it up, you'll make it feel better, and the fight doesn't have to happen. It's this way throughout the entire game. Each new enemy is like a puzzle in and of itself. By engaging in empathy, you should be able to determine the enemy's state of mind and figure out a way of either helping it, or at the very least, of ending the fight without any bloodshed. Playing the game this way is challenging too. If you never fight, you'll never level up and you'll never get stronger. The creator, Toby Fox, seems to be trying to emphasize that choosing empathy, choosing nonviolence, is always going to be harder than taking the easy route. But the rewards for choosing empathy are far, far greater in the long run. Well, that's all I've got for now. What do you think? Do you have any other games I should consider for maybe a future look at more JRPGs that demonstrate empathy and kindness? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know what you think of this in general. I get that this wasn't the lightest and most goofy video I've ever done, but every now and then I feel like being a little serious on main. If you're in the market for a JRPG podcast, I hope you'll check out the JRPG Pursuit. It's a show I host alongside my friends Abdallah and Emily from Morbology here on YouTube. The link to that channel is down in the description, or you can listen to it on any podcast app you prefer. Oh, and I have a Patreon. I guess I haven't really talked about it that much, but it provides a place for like-minded people to hang out and chat about games and stuff. The link to that is down in the description if you're interested in supporting me in the channel that way. Once again, if you wouldn't mind liking the video and subscribing if you're not, I'd really appreciate it. And with that, until next time. Bye.